revisiting the Gen 3 Topaz. So there's a couple reasons you should consider DVO. So if you don't like the way it rides, you can reach out to the factory department and they could retune it. And in my case, a larger negative volume chamber may save the day. So larger negative volume chamber will give it a more plush ride. So if you like coil shocks like me, this might be the savior. After extensively testing the DVO Topaz with various volume configurations, do not put more than 2 negative or 2 positive tokens in this shock because it doesn't give you any additional benefits. And I found on my more linear suspension type specialized bikes, this to be the best setup. Previously, this summer going to the bike park on the specialized status, learning the Topaz Prime is an excellent shock. It really holds its own in the high-speed chunk. So much so, I would rate the Topaz Prime above the Fox Float X for the simple reason we have high-speed compression adjust and a better damping circuit. And don't forget, we have an adjustable bladder pressure to adjust the spring rate, so you have 2 ways to adjust the spring rate. So my main grumble with the Topaz, in most air shocks, it feels a little bit harsh. So this larger HV can from DVO may save the day. So let's pop off that standard air can and bolt her up. Moving back to air shocks, I'm starting to learn that 240 PSI is the magic number for air shocks. If you are a heavy guy like me, 100 kilograms, 220 pounds, and you go above 240 PSI, I just feel like it compromises the air spring circuit. So there's a very important step I found when installing air can on the DVO Topaz Prime. We need to put some grease inside of the new air can so we do not rip the O-ring between the negative and positive chambers. Previously riding the full all-in suspension for about a month. So we're gonna see how it stacks up against the DVO in another video. Here's a quick size reference for the TTX2 versus the DVO Topaz Prime with the HV air can installed. The high-speed compression circuit on the Topaz Prime is adjusted with this green dial. So it does take quite a bit of time because it's not like click, click, click. It's like spin, click, spin, click. So we have 10 clicks of high-speed compression and 5 clicks of low. So this is a good thing to keep things simple. First step, we want to adjust the bladder pressure on any DVO shock because basically it kind of loses air throughout the month. So I personally am always going for the minimum pressure for a softer ride. The Topaz Prime is one of the few shocks with a sag indicator. As soon as the DVO logo disappears on the stanchion, that's about 30% sag. With the HV air can installed, I had to pump it up to 270. So remember the magic rule of air shocks. We are shooting for 240 PSI, but you'll have to stay tuned to find out what happens later. First ride on the HV air can Topaz. So I was pleasantly reminded on the first test run at how good DVO does the rebound range. So I have this step down here that really likes to buck the front of the bike or buck you over the handlebars, and it was excellent. Going off a tiny little curb huck to flat, pleasantly surprised again by the HV air can's more cushiony ride. So as much as I like DVO, I will always tell people the truth and never sell out. So this shock is distinctly lacking a climb lever. So not a huge deal if you're on an e-bike, but this Rocky Mountain does have a extremely inefficient suspension platform and that shock is bobbing all around. A couple runs down the test track, I got the compression in about the middle and the rebound in about the middle. With one positive token, let's move into some higher speed footpaths, as some people might say. So I was pleasantly reminded again by how well the DVO handles its high speed damping. Basically you go fast and it feels like you're in control. And a tiny little air shock is always nice to have on some boring cross country trails. Because of its faster reaction speed, it's definitely more lively. So I honestly do not know why DVO doesn't just spec all the air shocks with the HV air can, because basically the positive and negative chambers are perfectly balanced. Like so much so, like I'm going to say it's better than the Fox Float X. And I truly do like the Fox Float X. But I did notice one thing during my test ride. When I was looking at the shock while climbing, I was like, damn, that's a lot of sag in that shock. So I got home and I plugged the shock pump in And this is the second shock this has happened to me on. The last one was the Öhlins. Basically, the shock had purged from 270 down to 240. So that's where I'm getting that magic 240 PSI number. I think this is just the magic maximum number for air pressure in an air shock, but that is purely my opinion. While reinflating the shock up to 30% sag, basically the Schrader valve broke. So it was definitely a sign from God, and he was like, you need to run 240 PSI from now on. So I got a new Schrader valve from the auto parts store. It's the same one that goes inside of your car's tire. Just make sure you have this little tool. And I popped it in and pumped it back up to 270 PSI like an idiot. So I just want to try it out with 270 PSI actual in the shock, not it burping down to 240. And I wasn't truly impressed with the Topaz, even with the HV can with that much pressure. So I knew precisely what needed to happen after about half a mile of trail. Put it back down to 240 PSI. Returning the Topaz down to 240 PSI, that nice plushy feeling had returned. But remember, everything in suspension is a compromise. It lacks a little bit of snappiness with its larger negative volume chamber. So I think it definitely gives the shock a more heavy duty, girthy feel with the HV air can installed. So let's talk about those air cans. Most manufacturers consider the larger negative volume chamber shocks to be for progressive frames, and the smaller air cans are going to be for the more linear specialized frames. But if you're not happy with your normal air can, definitely give this air can a go, because it's not a particularly expensive upgrade. Taking the Topaz Prime out with the HV air can into those wet Lomer winter trails, the larger negative volume chamber definitely gives it more traction than the standard air can. While it does lack the traction of a coil shock, everything in suspension is a compromise. This tiny little shock loves to slide around the trail, and it's probably one of the best shocks I've ever been on to jump and jib and just basically have fun. It is so fast to your rider's inputs. I am now a huge fan of the tiny air shock. I could never understand why someone would prefer a Fox Float X to a Fox Float X2. You just have to have the right air can and ride it for a couple weeks. Now, visually speaking, I think the Öhlins shock looks better with the actual body sliding up on the large stanchion. But you can't look at the looks, you gotta see how it rides. So next week's video, we got the DVO WP collaboration fork, and that one will be on your screen.